Hi guys. Um, I forgot I didn't attach my other camera, so I'm working with this camera today. Um, okay. Uh, I, this is obviously a very random video, but I was really thinking about the book that kind of changed my life. Um, and it was like the very first philosophy book that I ever grappled with. And I remember when I first encountered it, it was so for me, it was so dense. Like there's just so many thoughts that really, uh, you know, changed my life. Uh, and ever since then, it kind of really made me pursue philosophy in a more serious manner. And this book actually, surprisingly enough, it's none of the I think when people first encounter philosophy, uh, typically we're talking about like the first classical books of philosophy, or some of the more classical authors of philosophy, like Plato, Aristotle, um, the the more pre the Greeks. You know, this is the people that we talk about when we first engage with philosophy. The Greek philosophers and Plato, Aristotle, Hegel, Nietzsche, all these philosophers that people typically engage with first. Um, However, for me, um, I actually ended up engaging with this book right here. Um, and it's called the Reconstruction of Religious Thought in Islam. And the reason why this book was so significant for me, when you look back at it, when you look back, when I look back at it, because actually this was the first book that I actually read more than once. I think to this day I haven't read a philosophy book more than once, except this one. Um, that's how impactful it was for me, but also because um, also because Iqbal really challenges the mystical side of um, he challenges the mystical side of just solely um, you could say actually he challenges Sufism in some aspects. That he's not content with Sufism because uh, what they've done is that they've solely dedicated their life to um, the other world, right? The for paradise. They have solely dedicated their life uh, in that way. And Iqbal's critique of this is that you cannot just basically just be like a little person, like just be a person meditating in a cave and just neglect reality and just have no more interactions with reality and the real world. Uh, and Iqbal feels like there is a contradiction in that when you neglect that aspect of just solely trying to achieve some type of God consciousness and just neglect the world that as it stands right now. And so Iqbal has a lot to say, and that's his like critique about basically like extreme spiritualism, but also his critique of well, he does this comparison that I really enjoy about the West and the Eastern world, where he's saying that the Eastern world has dedicated too much, has also neglected. Like he reveals the one-sidedness of both of the spheres, the eastern and the western side. He's saying that the western side has made so much progress, has made so much advancement, but what they have not advanced, what has left to be decayed, is the spiritual aspect. The spiritual aspect has been denied, has not been advanced, not progressed, not uh, been pushed forward. And this is why he starts to bring up Nietzsche in some cases. Now, his again, his critique on the Eastern world is that it is just a world immersed in this spiritual practice, but they've done nothing to advance in civilization. So Iqbal really tries to bring about a balanced look, and I guess you could say, like, if I were to bring up Hegel in this sense, what um, I don't want to get this wrong, but at least this is how I understand it now. If I were to bring up Western and Eastern world in a better context, the way Iqbal brings it up, I would say Iqbal's critique of the Western and Eastern world is this: that the Western world was too occupied with consciousness itself and not being itself, like achieving being in itself, right? But the spiritual world achieved an impasse in terms of being in itself, but they never achieved consciousness itself. So this is how I would phrase it for my own understanding, and basically how I would do it is, or how I would rephrase it for people that don't understand what I'm saying, is that um, the way Iqbal critiques the Eastern and Western world is that um, the Western world has made advancements towards truth, but don't know how to embody truth. And the Eastern world has learned how to embody truth, but don't know how to make progress in like historical progress in truth, if that makes any sense. So this is what uh, really changed and impacted my thought. And also, Iqbal was the first thinker that really introduced me to, made me want to read about Nietzsche, because he was very adamant about Nietzsche. Um, it's funny because him being a Muslim, he was actually he had a, when you read his work, this is his only serious philosophical work. Everything else is just poetry and so on. But is that Iqbal, he has a very soft spot for Nietzsche. Um, and it's because of Iqbal that I decided to actually started engaging with Nietzsche after my deployment, and it really changed my perspective on a lot of things. And really, actually, Iqbal was really just what got me into philosophy in general. And uh, there's something that Iqbal was very serious about, was that, I mean, this book tackles so many things. It's not just about um, reconstructing Islamic thought. In many ways, Iqbal, this piece of work that Iqbal tries to present, is that he tries in many ways to uh, show how do you get to the point where it's even possible to entertain a God in the first place, right? How do you get to that point? And he tackles a lot of concepts that um, you could probably say like most typical apologists don't even go that way. And it's really funny because actually Iqbal doesn't go for the typical God arguments that people usually talk about, right? Like just the very common God arguments, the design argument, um, and so forth. Like Iqbal really goes a different way in approaching. I would even say that it's not even an argument for God. It's an argument for consciousness in general. And I would say Iqbal, the reason why Iqbal is such an important thinker to me is because he's more interested in religious experience, but it's the way that he approaches religious experience and the way he approaches Western philosophy and Eastern philosophy that really changed my life in terms of just how he thinks about everything. I mean, he tackles a lot of concepts: time, space, um, infinite and finite. Just this small book, he condenses so much, and you can tell that he's well read in Western philosophy. I mean, he read Bergson, he was familiar with Bertrand Russell. I mean, he's talking about Zeno for crying out loud, um, and constructing his own argument for why you can, how Zeno actually formulated his question about, I think, the incapability of moving or something like that. I forgot how that formulates, but like Iqbal basically challenged that he formulated the question in the wrong way. Uh, but besides all that, Iqbal, what is really fascinating to me now that I am tackling Hegel, and this is something really mind blowing when I think about it, because Iqbal, what's very unique about Iqbal is his interpretation of the Islamic scripture, the aspect of the fall. For those of you that don't know this, the difference between Islamic uh, notions of the the coming of humanity, the rise of humanity, and the Christian version of humanity is that oftentimes the Christian version is very adamant about the original sin, right? And this would indicate the fall as such. But in Islamic scripture, there is no notion of original sin as such. And what I really like about Iqbal is his own interpretation of Adam. Adam is not the way Iqbal interprets Adam is not even a human being, like the first human being as such. Um, he describes it in a completely different way, which is very unique. But I figured I would share with you guys how Iqbal actually describes the fall that is very, very in line with Hegel. Like it's just so like now that I look at it, I understand why it affected me so much and why I was so adamant and why I loved Iqbal. It's just the way he describes the fall and the reason why the fall exists. And you'll be surprised about what Iqbal has to say about this. And I'll actually read this line that he says. So here he says, "Thus we see that the Quranic legend of the fall has nothing to do with the first appearance of man on this planet. Its purpose is rather to indicate man's rise from a primitive state of instinctive appetite to conscious possession of a free self, capable of doubt and disobedience. The fall does not mean any moral depravity. It is man's transition from simple consciousness to the first flash of self-consciousness, a kind of awakening from the dream of nature with a throb of personal causality in one's own being." And then he says, "Nor does the Quran regard the earth as a torture hall where an elementally wicked humanity is imprisoned for an original act of sin, man's first act of disobedience was also his first act of free choice. And he says here, and that is why, according to the Quranic narration, Adam's first transgression was forgiven. And he says, now goodness is not a matter of compulsion. It is the self's free surrender to the moral ideal and arises out of a willing cooperation of free egos. And then he actually says really something interesting here towards a little bit further down where he says, freedom is thus a condition of goodness. So already Iqbal says something that is really interesting. And it's not your typical interpretation of, I'll be honest, it's definitely not your orthodox interpretation of Islamic scripture. It's not your typical, the way Iqbal describes the fall, I'll tell you right now, it is not the typical conception that most Muslims give when they talk about the Quran. And it's also, it's just a very different theological position. And it's because Iqbal didn't decide to just stay in his realm of theology. The way Iqbal grew up, because I read some of biographies from Iqbal, is that Iqbal did start off in a very conventional, like Islamic childhood, right? Like memorizing the Quran front to back, reciting it, being able to recite it when he was a kid. He knew everything about the Quran and so on. But then as he got older, he went to Europe and he actually got a philosophy degree. And he did his paper thesis on Zoroastrianism or something like that. But anyways, he's well versed in Western philosophy. At least this is the impression he gets. And he also, in this book himself, he also constructs his own theory about personality, and how there's two personalities, and one personality is one that is in time, like in sequential time, and then there's another personality that we have that is time that is and this is where his influence of Bergson comes in, because you can tell Bergson was kind of quite an influence on him, is where he comes up with a personality that is a personality in duration. And this of course you can only understand if you read Bergson, a time as duration, a philosophy in time, a personality that is in time as duration. So Iqbal splits the personality as two personalities: a personality that is more finite, and then a personality that is more infinite. But anyways, going back to the way Iqbal describes the reason for the fall, this to me now sounds very Hegelian. How he's like, the whole point is to go from your instinctive, if I were to use like Kojève's words, your instinctive animal eye to your self-conscious eye. That's the whole point. That's the whole point of the fall. Not any moral anything. The whole point is this. And Iqbal dives further into that. And that's why I think that line that Iqbal says is so important about, he's like, the very first act of disobedience was also man's first free act. So, and what really interests me on top of that is his concept of hell. His concept of hell is perhaps the most intriguing. And so that's why I'm always hesitant when people are very like adamant atheists, because most atheists only have let me put this, basically they basically have like a posted sticker of religion. They have like just a very brochure type knowledge of external religion. And if you really want, this is how I would say, if you really want to be an atheist, I would, before you take that leap, I would say you'd have to tackle mysticism. You'd have to tackle all the types of theology that is out there before you dive into a sort of certain atheist, because I really feel like um, it becomes just so complicated once you actually tackle all the interpretations as such. And most people that are conventional atheists just have posted sticker notes of what they think religion is. And what I really like about Iqbal is that Iqbal actually defines his own notion of what religion is. And it's and it's actually I forgot, I don't know, I'd have to find it, but it's not what you think it is. Let's just put it that way. It's not what you think of it. The way Iqbal defines religion, it's definitely not the way you think it is. And Iqbal also he leaves room for exploration, meaning like, and I think this was kind of what got me into phenomenology as well, is that Iqbal was very adamant about religious experience and that this field is so open that there's much to explore. Because he also read William James uh, on his book of religious experience, and he agrees with some of James's stuff, but he also points out that there's plenty to talk about in this aspect of religious experience, and there's so much to explore. Um, so this is what really just inspired me: the fact that Iqbal leaves it open. Iqbal he tackles so many concepts, and his reinterpretation of Adam, of hell, of just the way you should view the ego, the rise to self consciousness. This is all so. It was so inspiring to me that I think I kind of embodied that in my own uh, work afterwards. I think that's what really embodied me. And sometimes I feel very emotional about my first encounter with Iqbal because um, I was in deployment, obviously, and I was definitely suffering existentially. You know, I was suffering existentially, and I craved something so bad, and it was Iqbal that kind of uh, it was my encounter with Iqbal that really saved myself. Um, really saved myself, and it really got me on the path to doing what I'm doing today. Um, Even though I thought myself that I would be pursuing, his line of thought, religious experience. I thought that that's what I would end up doing, but in many ways, I think the way I'm so obsessed about the way we interact with human beings, that the way what is a human relationship, that kind of question that I posed. Uh, I think in many ways I'm still kind of embodying his work. Um, and then with all the people that I've met and all the thinkers that I am now tackling, I still feel like it's all very connected. And um, yeah, so that is really the first book that got me um, into philosophy. And and it's funny because when you read Iqbal, like you'd be like, you need to know all these philosophical concepts before you even read Iqbal. Like you need to know this, but I didn't know any of it. I didn't know at all. I didn't know who Zeno was. I didn't know who Bertrand Russell was. I didn't know all these names that Iqbal just drops on you, right? He just drops it on you. Uh, and he talks about Nietzsche. He talks about, again, just so many thinkers all condensed in like, uh, a couple of sections, and he's tackling their thoughts as you read him. He's critiquing some of their ideas and advancing some of them, and then he's coming up with some of his own. And I never thought, I mean, obviously you can tell, like I still to this day, I probably wouldn't recommend it just for anybody, just willy nilly, but I did it. And I remember I spent a lot of time and a lot of grueling effort to try to understand this book. And I would say if I were to read it a third time, it would only, at this point, it obviously would only just advance further my thought and my admiration for this person, because it has really pushed my own thinking and my own um, advancement and just anything that I've done in terms of philosophy, and the fact that I'm doing these videos and so on. Even though for me, I no longer claim a specific type of religion as such. I still understand the purpose, and I think it is naive to just just to discard as such, like as if it is completely useless as such. And I think there's real consequences for doing so. And Iqbal paints that picture very well, but he also paints the opposite picture, um, of people that just dedicate their life to God consciousness and believe that actually that you can just neglect the world, like as if you can just do some spiritual bypass and just meditate on a mountain. It's like Iqbal, like you can tell that he loathes this ideology. He completely hates this. And it's funny because he considers himself a Sufi as well, but he is critiquing Sufism itself, and this specific ideology, because he's saying that you are so obsessed with the other world, as if as if this world didn't exist right here, right now, um, as if, and I think the influence of Nietzsche is what really uh, got him to have this worldview, because he really felt like Nietzsche needed a he again, like when you read Iqbal, you can tell he's so adamant about Nietzsche because he believed till the day that he died, Iqbal, that Nietzsche needed some type of spiritual guidance, because he was you know he felt that Nietzsche would have been better guided with somebody that knew how to travel those paths that Nietzsche traveled alone. So yeah, anyways, I just wanted to talk about this book. It was a book that really changed my life, changed my perspective, got me into philosophy, got me into psychoanalysis, it got me into so many things. I would have never known that it would have had the impact that it did, but it did. It did. Um, and now that after reading some Hegel, I can look at Iqbal now and be like, I think he also read some Hegel, even though I don't believe he directly mentions Hegel. But if I were to be bold, I would maybe even say Iqbal might have been a Muslim Hegel. So, all right, I will stop there. I just wanted to talk about this because maybe it interests people, maybe it doesn't. But hey, all right, guys, take care.